There, it's Corey with the Send Smarter Intervention, and today we wanted to talk about how to set appropriate IEP goals for reading and writing. So one of the things that we see often is that there's a lot of variability in what IEP goals might look like for students who are struggling with reading and writing. Oftentimes they might be really comprehensive and look really awesome. There's a lot of different components to it, which is great. And other times it feels like we have one goal that's really just around fluency or something like that. And we get it because it can be so hard to write effective goals that are also easy to measure. So one of the things that we see is we see all these reading fluency goals, and I think the reason that we see goals really designed around reading fluency, even though that's probably one of the worst goals that we can have, is because it's easy to measure. It's easy to get a record of, how quickly are students reading. And there's an idea that, when students are reading quickly, they're comprehending better. It shows that they understand the decoding principles. So I understand the thought behind it. However, reading fluency is a result of other skills being intact. And we also need to make sure that we're not necessarily just looking at fluency when really what we want is we want strong reading comprehension. The end goal of reading and reading instruction is so that we can comprehend material that we are reading. And so really what we want to be looking at is our goals should really look like either a decoding goal, so we want to make sure that students can actually read and sound out the words. It should be maybe a reading vocabulary goal, so once we've read a word that we can accurately define that word, or we can accurately identify words that we don't know. Or it really should be more of a comprehension goal so that at the end of a passage we can pull out key information in details. So that being said, those are our preferences. However, we do see value in reading fluency as well. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we can start to put those together. Then in terms of writing is really the flip side of reading. We really see them as reciprocal processes, so we always like to look at them together. For every reading process that we have, we could also have the same process mirrored in writing. And so we want to take a look at that when we're looking at goals as well. If we have a reading goal, we should really see whether it makes sense to have a writing goal as well. So if we want students to be able to code certain words, we also want them to be able to encode or spell those words as well. So when we're designing our instruction, we want to be looking at both of those. So in this week's blog, we do have a lot of information around what we want to make sure that we're doing. So in reading, we want to make sure that we are looking at phonological awareness, phonics, reading fluency, vocabulary development, and reading comprehension. None of those necessarily take precedence over the other. It really depends on where students are breaking down, where we want to focus in on those goals. We don't just want to focus on things because they're easy to measure. We want to make sure we're focusing on them because those are the areas that students are actually struggling with. Then, in terms of what we want to do in thinking about how we're going to design these, is we really want to take a look at how those 5 core components of literacy map onto our neural processes that are involved with reading. So the 3 neural processes that have to come together are orthography. We have to be able to see a word and recognize all the letters, the visual print. We also need to make sure that we have strong phonology. So we have to understand the sound structure of our language. And then finally, we need to be able to have strong semantics, and that's going to be that vocabulary or that understanding of the meaning of words. All 3 of those things have to come together in less than half of a second for students to be effective and efficient in reading. And so we really want to get an idea of where are they performing in each of those areas and where are they breaking down, because that can start to guide our instruction. We've mapped those 5 core components onto those neural processes so that we can see why those 5 core components are so important. Then when we flip and we take a look at writing, obviously, like I said, there is a reciprocal process to every reading skill that we have could also be demonstrated in writing. But when we look at writing, we also want to look at the fact or the idea that there's a lot to writing as well. And so one of the things that we need to look at is we need to look at a student's content. Can they get ideas out on paper? How are they organizing that content? Is it organized effectively? Then we want to take a look at structure. Are they putting their sentences together in a grammatically correct way that makes sense? Our language typically follows a subject, predicate, adverbial. We have really a pattern of speech that we have, and we need to make sure that we are reciprocating that in our writing. So that structure is more about how we're structuring those sentences. And the mechanics is obviously our spelling, our capitals, our punctuation, our use of commas, all of those pieces as well. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at all of that. So in terms of how we put our goals together, we have a literacy goal bank that we have designed that we use in order to start to create goals for students. And so once we've assessed, we always have to make sure that we've assessed students so that we know where they're breaking down. If we don't know where they're breaking down, we cannot put effective goals in place. So this is why, as part of the IEP process, we always have a student evaluation as part of it so that we can start to design a really strong plan that's going to specifically target their individual areas of need. So if we find out that we have students who are struggling with orthography, they're having a hard time with the visual print, then we need to start looking at orthography goals. So we have lots of examples here. If you go check out the blog, you'll be able to download that right away. If we find out that students are struggling in phonology, we may want to have some of these other more phonological awareness-based goals. Obviously, it really just depends on the student's age, ability, where they're breaking down, and which of these we're going to pick. It's very individualized. It's not just throwing them in there because we think that that's what we need. We need to make sure that we know where students are struggling. Then, if we recognize, okay, it is a decoding error, we need to start to figure out how to work with that. These are some goals that we could put in place to support decoding or sounding words out. Like I said, every reading process has a reciprocal writing process. So decoding is sounding words out, encoding is spelling words. So oftentimes what we like to do is we like to have a decoding and an encoding goal that are working towards the same things, because if you've got students who are spelling well, they're definitely going to be reading well. Now, I'm going to say that is true in the case that we're actually providing explicit instruction. Sometimes you may have students who have strong visual memory, and so they spell well even though they can't decode. Let's keep in mind that we need to make sure that we're providing explicit instruction in those areas. Fluency. So I talked about fluency in the beginning. I hate seeing fluency goals as the primary goal. This is a result. This is a goal that we really want to work on only when we've worked on the other areas first. We want to make sure that we're explicitly targeting things other than just fluency. Fluency by itself is not a helpful goal. However, it can be a helpful goal in conjunction with these other goals. We need to make sure that we're looking at it at the sound level, the word level, the sentence level, and the passage level. All super important. And then we want to look at semantics. We really want to look at meaning. We want to make sure that students are able to identify, for example, real words from nonsense words, or they're able to use graphic organizers to define words, or they're able to pick out words that they don't know. But again, we need to make sure that we have some really concrete goals here. We don't want to be giving random vocabulary lists. We want them to be able to self-monitor when they know words and when they don't, because that's the end goal in terms of vocabulary development for reading. We also have some comprehension goals here as well. Clearly, depending on student need, we should have that through assessment and understanding what that needs to look like. That's what we want to start looking at, is really that end goal. Once we've really worked on all the other pieces, we want to make sure that we're not leaving out comprehension. It is the primary goal, so let's never lose sight of that. And really using the framework of assessing students to determine where they're falling at in that literacy processing triangle with those 5 core components of reading and the 3 core components that we've outlined for writing. That's how we can start to make really effective reading and writing goals. If you have any questions, let us know in the comments, and we are so excited to start this conversation.